Every branch of the American military has tried to kill the B-52 bomber. Budget analysts have called it wasteful. Defense planners have declared it obsolete. Generals have promised that newer aircraft would replace it within a decade. They've been making that promise since the 1970s. The B-52 is still flying. This aircraft entered service in 1952. That's not a typo. The bombers conducting combat missions today are older than the Vietnam War, older than the Cuban Missile Crisis, older than most countries currently sitting in the United Nations. They're expected to remain operational until at least 2050, meaning they'll serve for nearly 100 years. How is this possible? America builds the most advanced military aircraft on Earth. Stealth bombers invisible to radar. Fighters that dominate every adversary. Drones that strike from continents away. Yet somehow this lumbering giant from the Eisenhower era keeps outliving everything designed to replace it. The B-1 Lancer was supposed to be the successor. It's being retired early. The B-2 Spirit was the next hope. Too few were built. The B-21 Raider is the current attempt, and the Air Force has already announced that it won't replace the B-52 either. The explanation involves nuclear nightmares, impossible engineering, 7 decades of continuous warfare, and a secret about military aviation that nobody wants to admit. The best weapon isn't always the newest. Sometimes it's just the one that refuses to quit. The B-29 Stratofortress was the most advanced bomber ever built when it dropped atomic weapons on Japan in August 1945. Within months, it was obsolete. This wasn't a failure of engineering. It was a transformation of warfare itself. Nuclear weapons had changed everything. Future conflicts wouldn't be won by armies clashing on battlefields. They would be decided in the opening hours, as bombers raced to deliver atomic payloads before the enemy could respond. The B-29 couldn't do this job. It was too slow, cruising at speeds that would give Soviet interceptors plenty of time to respond. It flew too low, well within reach of anti-aircraft systems already being developed. Most critically, it couldn't reach the Soviet heartland from American bases without stopping to refuel multiple times along the way. Each landing would be a vulnerability. Each delay would give the enemy time to strike first. American military planners faced an urgent problem. They possessed the most powerful weapons in human history but lacked any reliable way to deliver them against their primary adversary. Missiles capable of intercontinental flight were still science fiction. Everything depended on building a new kind of bomber. The requirements issued to aircraft manufacturers seemed almost fantastical. Design a bomber that could fly from the continental United States to Moscow and return without ever touching down. Build something that could cruise at altitudes above Soviet air defenses. Create an aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons that weighed tens of thousands of pounds. Do all of this with technology that barely existed. Boeing won the contract in 1946, but their initial designs disappointed everyone. Straight wings, propeller engines, configurations that represented evolution rather than revolution. For 2 years, engineers struggled to meet impossible demands with conventional thinking. The breakthrough came in October 1948. A team of Boeing engineers, facing the loss of their contract, locked themselves in a Dayton, Ohio hotel room for a weekend of desperate innovation. They emerged with a completely new concept. Swept wings for high-speed flight. 8 jet engines for the thrust needed to lift massive payload. An aircraft unlike anything that had ever flown. The Air Force approved the design immediately. The prototype flew on April 15, 1952. Mass production began before testing was complete. Between 1952 and 1962, Boeing delivered 744 B-52 bombers across 8 variants. The aircraft built to solve the obsolescence problem of 1945 has now outlived every aircraft designed to replace it. 76 B-52H models remain in service today, still carrying out variations of the mission that created them. delivering weapons to targets that nothing else can reach. Boeing's engineers in the 1950s were terrified of being wrong. Aerospace engineering was still part science, part art, and part educated guessing. Computer modeling didn't exist. Mathematical calculations could only predict so much. Wind tunnel tests revealed some truths but hid others. So they overbuilt everything. The B-52's airframe was designed with structural margins that seemed ridiculous at the time. Components rated to handle stresses that normal operations would never approach. Wings engineered to flex under loads that would never occur in actual flight. Joints and connections built to last far beyond any reasonable service life. This wasn't visionary planning for a century of service. It was pure paranoia. The engineers simply didn't trust their own work enough to build exactly to specification. They added extra strength as insurance against their own potential mistake. That paranoia saved the aircraft. The B-52H model entered service in 1961. Do the math on what that means. The youngest B-52 currently flying is over 60 years old. These aren't museum pieces occasionally taken out for air shows. These are combat aircraft conducting operational missions today, tomorrow, and for decades to come. Some individual airframes have been in continuous service across multiple generations of pilot. A grandfather who flew B-52s in Vietnam might have sat in the same cockpit seat his grandson uses today. The same physical aircraft, still flying, still fighting. How is this possible when modern military aircraft typically retire after 20 or 30 years? The answer lies in what has changed and what hasn't. Almost everything inside the B-52 has been replaced. Engines have been swapped multiple times. Avionics have been gutted and completely rebuilt. Weapon systems bear no resemblance to the original nuclear delivery configuration. Cockpit instruments evolved from analog gauges to digital displays. Communication systems, navigation equipment, defensive countermeasures have all been upgraded repeatedly. But the basic airframe remains untouched. The aluminum skin, the swept wings, the distinctive nose profile. The fundamental structure that gives the B-52 its physical form hasn't changed because it never needed to change. Those paranoid engineers built something far stronger than they realized. Modern analysis of B-52 airframes keeps returning the same verdict. The structural skeleton has enough life remaining for decades more service. The metal isn't fatiguing at rates that would force retirement. The bones are still strong. Everything else about the B-52 can be upgraded, modified, or replaced. The engines will change. The weapons will evolve. The electronics will transform. But the skeleton those nervous engineers overbuilt 70 years ago will keep flying until someone finally decides to stop it. Paranoia, it turns out, is excellent engineering. The B-52's most distinctive feature is its engine configuration. 8 turbofan engines mounted in 4 twin pods beneath the swept wings. No other operational aircraft uses this arrangement. There's a reason for that. It's horribly inefficient. When the B-52 was designed, jet engine technology was primitive. Individual engines didn't produce enough thrust to lift a fully loaded bomber. The solution was simple. Add more engines. 8 engines generating moderate thrust could do what 2 powerful engines couldn't. The original engines were Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet. They were thirsty, smoky, and unreliable by modern standards. The B-52H upgraded to TF-33 turbofans, which improved efficiency somewhat but still fell far short of contemporary engine performance. Those TF-33 engines are still flying today. They've been in service for over 60 years. Finding replacement parts has become an exercise in archaeological engineering. Some components are manufactured by companies that no longer exist. Others require custom fabrication because original specifications have been lost. The Air Force has been trying to replace these engines for decades. The current plan involves installing 8 new Rolls-Royce F-130 engines, which will dramatically improve fuel efficiency, reduce maintenance requirements, and extend the aircraft's operational range. This re-engining program is expected to cost over $11 billion and take until the 2030s to complete. 8 engines also create 8 times the maintenance burden, 8 times the fuel systems, 8 times the potential failure points. A modern bomber design would never use this configuration. But the B-52 wasn't designed for modern efficiency. It was designed for Cold War survival. And it survived. The B-52's original purpose was singular and terrifying: deliver thermonuclear weapons to the Soviet Union. Everything about the aircraft was optimized for this apocalyptic mission. During the height of the Cold War, B-52s maintained continuous airborne alert. Aircraft loaded with nuclear weapons flew 24-hour missions along routes that would allow immediate strikes on Soviet targets if ordered. This operation, called Chrome Dome, kept nuclear-armed bombers in the air at all times between 1960 and 1968. The logic was grimly simple. Bombers on the ground could be destroyed in a surprise Soviet attack. Bombers already airborne could retaliate even if every American air base was vaporized. The B-52 became the airborne leg of the nuclear triad, alongside ground-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched weapons. Pilots trained endlessly for missions they hoped would never happen. They memorized target coordinates in the Soviet Union. They practiced low-level penetration routes designed to evade radar. They understood that if they ever received authentic launch orders, they probably wouldn't be coming home. Not because they'd be shot down, but because there might be nothing left to come home to. The psychological weight was crushing. These weren't combat missions in any traditional sense. They were one-way tickets to participate in human extinction. Some pilots coped through dark humor. Others through rigid compartmentalization. Many struggled with the implications for the rest of their lives. Chrome Dome ended after 2 accidents involving nuclear weapons. In 1966, a B-52 collided with a refueling tanker over Spain, dropping 4 hydrogen bombs near the village of Palomares. In 1968, another B-52 crashed in Greenland, scattering nuclear material across the ice. Neither incident resulted in nuclear detonation, but both demonstrated the risks of keeping armed bombers constantly airborne. The B-52 remains nuclear-capable today. It can carry air-launched cruise missiles equipped with nuclear warhead, but the continuous airborne alert is history. Now nuclear-armed B-52s wait on the ground, ready to launch within minutes if ordered. 126,000 sorties. More bomb tonnage than all of World War II combined. 2 miles of destruction from a single formation pass. 15 bombers shot down in 11 days. These numbers define the B-52's Vietnam experience, a conflict measured in statistics so massive they almost lose meaning. Operation Arc-Light began in June 1965, transforming the nuclear bomber into something its designers never imagined. The concept seems straightforward enough. The B-52's payload capacity designed for thermonuclear weapons would instead carry conventional high-explosive bombs. One aircraft built to destroy a city would now destroy jungle positions. Again and again and again. Each fully loaded B-52 carried approximately 70,000 pounds of ordnance. 84 500-pound bombs in the internal bay. 24 more on external pylons. When a formation of 3 aircraft dropped simultaneously, they created a kill zone roughly 2 miles long and half a mile wide. Nothing within that rectangle survived. The Vietnamese developed their own name for these attacks: Whispering Death. The bombers cruised at altitudes too high to see or hear from the ground. No warning preceded the destruction. The jungle would simply explode as if struck by an angry god. Survivors described absolute terror followed by absolute devastation. The Air Force ran these missions constantly, day after day, week after week, year after year. By the time American involvement ended, B-52s had flown over 126,000 combat sorties in Southeast Asia. The cumulative bomb tonnage exceeded everything dropped during World War II. More explosives than defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan required. All concentrated on a country smaller than California. Supply lines were cratered. Staging areas were obliterated. Troop concentrations were annihilated whenever intelligence located them. The destruction was real and measurable and absolutely staggering in scale. Yet the war dragged on. The enemy rebuilt supply lines overnight using labor that bombs couldn't eliminate. Guerrilla fighters hid in tunnels impervious to anything except direct hit. Forces dispersed rather than concentrating, denying the B-52s the mass targets that made strategic bombing effective. Destruction alone couldn't defeat an enemy willing to absorb unlimited punishment. Operation Linebacker II in December 1972 produced the conflict's most concentrated statistic. 11 days of maximum effort against Hanoi itself, the most heavily defended airspace on Earth at that time. North Vietnamese gunners fired surface-to-air missiles as fast as they could reload. The sky above the capital became a killing zone for any aircraft that entered. 15 B-52s went down during those 11 days. 33 crew members died. Another 33 ejected successfully only to be captured and imprisoned. Some spent years in captivity before finally coming home. The losses represented the heaviest punishment the bomber fleet had ever absorbed. But the campaign worked in one narrow sense. North Vietnam returned to peace negotiations after Linebacker II concluded. The pressure had registered. Whether those negotiations actually produced meaningful results remains debated by historians who've studied the conflict for 50 years. Vietnam taught the Air Force something uncomfortable about the B-52. The numbers could be overwhelming. The destruction could be absolute. The effort could exceed anything attempted in previous wars. And it still might not be enough. 20 years after Vietnam, the B-52 returned to combat over Iraq. Operation Desert Storm in 1991 showcased how dramatically the bomber's role had evolved. Gone were the massive formation raids against area target. The new B-52 missions emphasized precision and psychological impact. Bombers carrying cruise missiles could strike targets from hundreds of miles away, never entering Iraqi airspace. Aircraft that did penetrate enemy territory used updated defensive systems to survive threats that would have destroyed their predecessors. The most famous B-52 mission of the Gulf War was also the longest combat sortie in history at that time. 7 B-52s launched from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, flew directly to Iraq, launched cruise missiles against priority targets, and returned home. The round trip covered 14,000 miles and took 35 hours. Pilots were in the air for a day and a half straight. This mission demonstrated something important. The B-52 didn't need to be stealthy or fast. It just needed to launch weapons from beyond the reach of enemy defenses. The bomber had evolved from a penetrating nuclear delivery system into a standoff missile truck. Iraqi troops learned to fear the sound of approaching B-52s. The psychological impact of carpet bombing hadn't diminished since Vietnam. Entire units surrendered after B-52 strikes, their defensive positions transformed into moonscapes of overlapping craters. Aircrews have called the B-52 the Buff for decades. Officially, this stands for Big Ugly Fat Fellow. Unofficially, the F stands for something else that better reflects how crews actually talk. The nickname captures something essential about the aircraft. The B-52 isn't elegant. It doesn't look like a modern stealth bomber with its sleek angles and radar-absorbing surfaces. It's a blunt instrument, all wings and engines and bomb bay, designed in an era when brute force mattered more than subtlety. But there's affection in that nickname. Crews who fly the Buff tend to love it, despite or perhaps because of its quirks. The aircraft has personality in ways that newer bombers don't. Its analog origins mean that pilots actually fly the plane rather than managing computer systems. The physical controls, the engine noise, the sheer presence of the thing creates a connection that glass cockpits can't replicate. Every B-52 has a story. These airframes have been flying longer than most pilots have been alive. They've been through multiple wars, countless upgrades, and enough training missions to circle the globe thousands of times. The maintenance logs read like novels, documenting decades of repairs, modifications, and close calls. Some aircraft carry artwork dating back to the Vietnam era. Others have been repainted so many times that archaeologists could probably date the layers like tree rings. Each one is unique, with handling quirks that experienced pilots learn to recognize. The B-52 isn't just an aircraft. It's an institution with wings. Specifications on paper mean nothing if you don't understand what they allow an aircraft to actually do. The B-52's numbers translate into capabilities that no other bomber can match. Start with range. Combat radius without refueling extends approximately 4,480 miles. That means a B-52 taking off from Louisiana can strike targets in Eastern Europe and return home without ever landing on foreign soil. No forward bases required. No diplomatic negotiations for basing right. No vulnerable aircraft sitting on runways in allied countries. Add aerial refueling and range becomes essentially infinite. B-52s have conducted combat missions lasting over 35 hours, flying from the continental United States to targets on the other side of the world and back again. Pilots handed off controls, caught brief naps, ate meals, and kept flying while their bomber crossed oceans and continents. This capability fundamentally changes strategic calculations. An enemy cannot eliminate B-52 threats by attacking forward bases because the bombers don't need forward bases. They can operate from the American heartland, protected by thousands of miles of ocean and the full weight of continental air defenses. Service ceiling reaches 50,000 feet. At that altitude, the aircraft cruises above most weather systems that would complicate operations at lower altitude. More importantly, it operates above the effective range of many older surface-to-air missile systems. Not all threats, but enough to create a margin of safety that lower-flying aircraft don't enjoy. The 8 TF-33 engines produce combined thrust of 136,000 pounds. This sounds impressive until you calculate what it's pushing. Maximum takeoff weight reaches 488,000 pounds. The thrust-to-weight ratio is barely adequate, which explains why the B-52 isn't fast. Maximum speed tops out at 650 miles per hour, Mach 0.86. But speed doesn't matter when your weapons can travel faster than any aircraft. Modern B-52 missions rarely require the bomber to approach anywhere near enemy defenses. Cruise missiles launch from hundreds of miles away. Standoff weapons engage targets long before the aircraft enters threatened airspace. The B-52 serves as a truck, hauling weapons to launch points and then releasing them to do the dangerous work. This is where payload capacity becomes crucial. The internal bomb bay handles up to 70,000 pounds of ordnance. External hardpoints add another 50,000 pounds. Typical combat loads run around 60,000 pounds, leaving margins for fuel and performance. 60,000 pounds translates into real combat capability. A single B-52 can carry 20 cruise missiles, each capable of precisely striking a different target hundreds of miles away. One bomber, one sortie, 20 enemy positions destroyed. Multiply that across a squadron of aircraft and the math becomes overwhelming for any adversary. Alternatively, that payload can carry precision-guided bombs for close air support missions, or naval mines for maritime denial operations, or anti-ship missiles for fleet engagement. The B-52's payload flexibility means it can adapt to almost any mission requirement simply by changing what it carries. The physical dimensions seem almost comically large for a combat aircraft. Wingspan of 185 feet exceeds many airliners. Length of 159 feet stretches across tarmac. Height of over 40 feet requires specialized hangars. Empty weight of 185,000 pounds puts it in a category with small cargo ship. These dimensions create logistical challenges. Not every runway can handle a B-52. Not every hangar can shelter one. Ground equipment must be specialized for the aircraft's size and weight. But these same dimensions enable the payload and fuel capacity that make the bomber irreplaceable. 5 crew members manage all of this capability. Aircraft commander and pilot handle flight operations from the upper deck. Radar navigator and navigator work weapons and routes from a lower compartment. Electronic warfare officer monitors the threat environment and operates defensive systems. Earlier variants included a tail gunner, but that position was eliminated as defensive tactics evolved. The guns themselves were eventually removed. Modern B-52 defense relies on electronic countermeasures, standoff distance, and support from other aircraft rather than shooting back at attackers. These specifications have remained remarkably stable across decades of service. The airframe dimensions are fixed by the original 1950s design. Engine performance stays within historical parameters. What changes constantly is how these baseline capabilities get employed, which weapons the bomber carries, which systems guide them, which tactics maximize survival and effectiveness. The B-52's weapons capability has expanded dramatically from its original nuclear-only mission. Modern aircraft can carry virtually every air-delivered weapon in the American arsenal. Gravity bombs range from 500-pound general-purpose munitions to 2,000-pound penetrators designed to destroy hardened bunkers. The aircraft can carry cluster munitions that scatter smaller bomblets across wide areas. Precision-guided bombs using GPS or laser guidance have largely replaced unguided ordnance for most missions. The AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile gives the B-52 true standoff capability. These missiles can be launched from hundreds of miles away, navigating to their targets using terrain-following radar and GPS. The conventional version carries a 3,000-pound warhead. The nuclear version remains classified but is believed to carry a variable-yield thermonuclear weapon. AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles represent the newest cruise missile capability. These stealthy weapons can strike targets over 600 miles away with precision measured in feet rather than yard. The extended-range version pushes that distance to over 1,000 miles. For maritime missions, the B-52 can carry AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. More recently, the aircraft has been adapted to carry the AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missile, which can engage naval targets at ranges exceeding 200 miles. This capability transforms the bomber into a ship killer, threatening enemy fleets from distances they cannot effectively counter. Mines represent another mission set. The B-52 can rapidly deploy naval mines across sea lanes, closing waterways to enemy shipping. During the Vietnam War, B-52s mined North Vietnamese harbors as part of Operation Pocket Money, demonstrating how the bomber could influence naval warfare without ever engaging ships directly. The common theme across all these weapons is range. The B-52 doesn't need to get close to its target. It launches from distances that keep it safe from most air defense systems, letting the weapons do the dangerous work of penetrating enemy airspace. A 70-year-old bomber flying against modern air defenses sounds suicidal. The B-52 survives through electronic warfare systems that have evolved continuously since the aircraft entered service. The AN/YELQ-172 electronic countermeasures system can jam enemy radar, preventing targeting by surface-to-air missiles or enemy fighters. The system detects incoming radar signals, analyzes their characteristics, and broadcasts jamming signals tailored to confuse specific threat type. Chaff dispensers release clouds of metallic strips that create false radar returns. Flare dispensers eject burning countermeasures designed to lure heat-seeking missiles away from the aircraft's engines. These systems can be activated manually by the electronic warfare officer or automatically in response to detected threat. The AN/ALR-46 radar warning receiver alerts crews when enemy radar is tracking them. Different tones indicate different threat types and levels of danger. Pilots and electronic warfare officers learn to interpret these audio cues instantly, responding with appropriate countermeasures before enemy weapons can be launched. Newer systems include the AN/YELQ 221 Advanced Electronic Warfare Suite, which integrates multiple countermeasure systems into a coordinated defensive package. This upgrade reflects decades of lessons learned about what actually works against modern air defenses. But the B-52's primary defense isn't electronic. It's tactical. Modern B-52 missions keep the aircraft well away from enemy air defense systems. Standoff weapons launch from hundreds of miles away. Flight routes are planned to avoid known threat locations. The bomber operates in environments where air superiority has already been established by fighter aircraft and suppression of enemy air defense missions. When the B-52 can't avoid threats entirely, it relies on support. Fighter escorts, electronic warfare aircraft, and anti-radar missiles clear the path. The bomber rarely operates alone in contested airspace. Flying a B-52 is unlike any other experience in military aviation. Missions routinely last 10 to 12 hours. Some extend to 20 hours or more. Crew members must manage fatigue, maintain focus, and remain ready for action during flights longer than most people stay awake. The aircraft has limited provisions for rest. There's no bunk, no comfortable seating. Just 5 crew stations in a noisy, vibrating aluminum tube. The cockpit sits remarkably high above the ground, giving pilots an unusual perspective during taxi and takeoff. The nose gear is so far forward that the aircraft seems to balance precariously on its main landing gear. This configuration requires unusual landing technique. Pilots must manage crosswinds carefully to avoid dragging the wing-mounted outrigger gear. Those outrigger gears, small wheels mounted near the wingtips, exist because the wings flex so dramatically during flight. On the ground, they prevent the wingtips from scraping the runway. In the air, the wings can flex upward by several feet under full fuel load. First-time passengers often panic watching the wings bend, assuming something is breaking. Experienced crews barely notice. Communication between crew stations relies on the intercom system. The 5 crew members can speak to each other, coordinate actions, and share information without radio transmissions that enemy forces might intercept. Building crew coordination takes months of training. Effective B-52 crews function as single organisms, anticipating each other's actions without conscious thought. The navigator and radar navigator work in a downstairs compartment, physically separated from the pilot. They manage weapons delivery, terrain avoidance, and much of the mission planning that occurs in flight. This separation creates unique challenges. The pilots can't see what the navigators are doing. The navigators can't see out the windows. Trust becomes essential. Of the 744 B-52s built, only 76 remain in active service. Where did the rest go? Most went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group maintains the world's largest aircraft boneyard. Rows of decommissioned B-52s bake in the desert sun, their aluminum slowly oxidizing in the dry climate that preserves them better than any other environment. Under arms control treaties with Russia, many B-52s were destroyed in ways that could be verified by satellite. Aircraft were cut into pieces using enormous guillotines. Wings separated from fuselages. Fuselages sliced into sections. The destruction was photographed and transmitted to Soviet observers as proof that America was complying with treaty obligations. These images became iconic representations of arms control in action. Massive bombers that once threatened nuclear annihilation reduced to aluminum scrap by their own country in the name of peace. But the boneyard isn't just a graveyard. It's also a parts warehouse. When operational B-52s need components that are no longer manufactured, maintenance crews turn to the stored aircraft. Wings, engines, landing gear, avionics boxes, wiring harnesses, Anything usable gets stripped from the decommissioned bombers and installed in flying aircraft. This cannibalization has kept the B-52 fleet operational long past when parts availability should have grounded it. Some components in flying aircraft might have originally been installed in bombers that were retired decades ago. The planes stay alive by consuming their dead. The B-52's upgrade history reads like a timeline of American military technology. Each decade brought new capabilities that transformed what the bomber could accomplish. Follow the progression and you watch 60 years of aerospace innovation compressed into a single aircraft. The 1960s established the baseline. Fresh from Boeing's production line, B-52H models entered service with state-of-the-art systems for their era. Analog instruments filled cockpit. Mechanical bombing computers calculated weapon release points. Navigators plotted courses using techniques that would have been familiar to World War II crews. The technology was advanced for its time but would soon be obsolete. The 1970s brought the first significant electronic warfare upgrade. Vietnam had demonstrated that B-52s could be shot down by determined adversaries with modern surface-to-air missiles. New jamming systems, improved radar warning receivers, and updated countermeasure dispensers gave crews better chances of surviving hostile airspace. The focus was survival rather than offensive capability. The 1980s revolutionized weapons delivery. The offensive avionics system upgrade replaced analog bombing computers with digital systems capable of precision that earlier technology couldn't approach. Carpet bombing gave way to targeted strikes. The same aircraft that once planned to obliterate entire cities could now destroy individual buildings within those cities. This transformation redefined the bomber's role from area destruction to precision engagement. GPS navigation arrived in the 1990s, eliminating navigation techniques that dated back centuries. Original B-52 crews used celestial observations, ground references, and dead reckoning to determine position. Accuracy depended on navigator skill, clear weather, and considerable luck. GPS systems know exactly where the aircraft is at all times, within meters, regardless of conditions. The uncertainty that had defined aerial navigation simply disappeared. The 2000s integrated the B-52 into networked warfare. Data link systems allowed bombers to receive targeting information while airborne. Aircraft could launch without knowing specific targets, receiving coordinates en route as tactical situations develop. Real-time intelligence flowed to cockpits that previously operated with hours-old information. The isolated bomber became a connected node in a vast military network. The 2010s focused on weapons integration. New precision-guided munitions required updated release systems. Standoff missiles demanded different targeting solutions. The internal weapons bay and external hardpoints adapted to carry weapons that hadn't existed when the aircraft was designed. Each new munition required software updates, hardware modifications, and crew training. The 2020s and beyond bring the most ambitious upgrades in the aircraft's history. Radar modernization will replace the aging APQ-166 with an active electronically scanned array system. This new radar provides capabilities that previous systems couldn't match. Ground mapping improves dramatically. Weather detection becomes more precise. Targeting accuracy increases. Multiple tracks can be maintained simultaneously. Electronic beam steering replaces mechanical scanning. The engine replacement program addresses the aircraft's oldest major component. Those TF-33 turbofans have been flying since the 1960s. Finding parts has become an archaeological exercise. Maintenance costs have skyrocketed. New Rolls-Royce F-130 engines will improve fuel efficiency by up to 40% while slashing maintenance requirements. The program costs over $11 billion and extends into the 2030s. Internal weapons bay modifications prepare the B-52 for hypersonic warfare. Missiles traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5 require different mounting and release systems than conventional weapons. The rotary launcher that served for decades will be replaced with new systems designed for these revolutionary munitions. Communication upgrades ensure the B-52 remains relevant in future network-centric warfare. Information sharing between aircraft, drones, satellites, ships, and ground controllers requires bandwidth and protocols that didn't exist when the bomber was designed. Modern systems will give the B-52 full participation in the connected battlespace. When all current programs complete, probably sometime in the 2030s, the B-52 will have been upgraded continuously for 7 decades. Every major system will have been replaced at least once. Some systems will have been replaced multiple times. Only the basic airframe will connect the finished product to the original 1960s aircraft. Same aluminum skeleton. Everything else transformed by 60 years of technological evolution. The Air Force has been trying to replace the B-52 for over 50 years. Every attempt has failed. The B-1 Lancer was supposed to be the successor. This supersonic bomber featured variable sweep wings, advanced avionics, and low-altitude penetration capability that would allow it to sneak beneath Soviet radar. President Carter canceled the program in 1977, arguing that cruise missiles made manned bombers obsolete. President Reagan revived it in 1981. The B-1 finally entered service in 1986. But the B-1 never replaced the B-52. It supplemented the fleet without making the older bomber obsolete. The B-1's mechanical complexity created maintenance nightmares. Its operating costs exceeded projections. The aircraft that was supposed to be cheaper and more capable turned out to be expensive and problematic. Today, the B-1 fleet is being retired while the B-52 keeps flying. The B-2 Spirit was the next attempt at replacement. This flying-wing stealth bomber can penetrate the most advanced air defenses on Earth without being detected. It's a technological marvel. It's also spectacularly expensive. Only 21 were built, at a cost of over $2 billion each. The Air Force wanted 132. Budget reality intervened. The B-2 performs missions the B-52 cannot, penetrating defended airspace to strike high-value targets. But there aren't enough B-2s to replace the B-52's capacity for delivering massive amounts of ordnance. The stealth bomber handles surgical strike. The Buff handles sledgehammer blows. The B-21 Raider is the newest attempt. This stealth bomber is currently entering production, with the Air Force planning to acquire at least 100 aircraft. It will eventually replace the B-2 and the B-1, but not the B-52. Current plans keep the Buff operational alongside the B-21 through at least 2050. The Air Force has apparently concluded that the B-52 fills a role that no other aircraft can match cost-effectively. It's not glamorous. It's not stealthy. It's not fast. It's just irreplaceable. The aircraft designed to end civilization spent 20 years providing close air support for infantry squads. This transformation captures everything strange about the B-52's modern combat history. Engineers in the 1950s optimized every system for nuclear weapon delivery against the Soviet Union. 70 years later, their creation was dropping precision munitions on Taliban positions, sometimes just hundreds of yards from American ground troops. From September 2001 through the Afghanistan withdrawal, B-52s remained in continuous combat deployment. 2 decades of operations that nobody anticipated for a bomber designed during the Truman administration. The technical evolution made this possible. Original B-52s couldn't have performed close air support without unacceptable friendly fire risk. Bombs missed by hundreds of feet. Targeting depended on crude calculations. Precision meant hitting somewhere within the general target area. Modern systems changed everything. Ground controllers designate targets with laser pointers. GPS-guided munitions follow coordinates to impact points measured in feet rather than yard. A bomber cruising at 50,000 feet can now strike with accuracy that would have seemed miraculous to Vietnam-era crews. Afghanistan established the pattern. Iraq repeated it during the 2003 invasion and years of counterinsurgency that followed. Shock and awe included B-52 strikes against military installations. Urban warfare saw bombers supporting troops in street-to-street fighting. Against ISIS, operations expanded across Syria and Iraq. B-52s flew from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, striking targets throughout the region. The bomber's ability to loiter for hours proved invaluable when opportunities emerged suddenly and required immediate response. Libya in 2011 demonstrated another capability transformation. Cruise missiles launched from B-52s struck Gaddafi's air defense systems, helping establish no-fly zones without risking aircraft penetration of defended airspace. The common thread across 2 decades of combat was adaptation. Nuclear delivery to close air support. Strategic bombing to counter terrorism. The B-52 became whatever each mission required because its fundamental capabilities, range, payload, and endurance, translated into flexibility that more specialized aircraft couldn't match. As American strategic focus shifts toward potential conflict with China, the B-52 is once again adapting to new requirements. The Pacific Ocean presents unique challenges for air power. Distances are vast. Bases are scattered across islands separated by thousands of miles of water. China's anti-access capabilities threaten aircraft carriers and forward bases that American forces have relied upon for decades. The B-52's range becomes crucial in this environment. Bombers can operate from bases in Guam, Australia, or even the continental United States, striking targets across the western Pacific without needing vulnerable forward positions. Air refueling extends this reach even further. New anti-ship missiles transform the B-52 into a maritime strike platform. A single bomber carrying long-range anti-ship missiles can threaten enemy naval formations at distances exceeding 500 miles. A formation of B-52s could saturate Chinese naval defenses with more missiles than they could effectively counter. Bomber task forces have begun deploying to the Pacific more frequently. These rotational deployments demonstrate American capability and commitment while providing aircrews with experience operating in the theater where they might one day fight. The irony is thick. The B-52 was designed to fly from America to bomb Russia. It spent its combat career striking targets in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Now it's preparing for potential conflict in the same Pacific region where American forces fought during World War II. The bomber designed for one war has now served through 3 generations of conflict without ever performing its original mission. The B-52's next evolution involves weapons that didn't exist when the aircraft was designed. Hypersonic missiles, traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5, represent the cutting edge of military technology, and the B-52 will carry them. The AGM-183 air-launched rapid response weapon was intended to be the first operational hypersonic missile carried by the B-52. Testing challenges have delayed the program, but development continues. When operational, this weapon will allow the bomber to strike targets at distances and speeds that current air defenses cannot counter. The rationale for using a 70-year-old bomber to carry next-generation weapons seems counterintuitive. But it makes perfect sense when you understand the economics. Developing a new aircraft to carry hypersonic missiles would cost billions and take over a decade. The B-52 already exists. Its payload capacity can accommodate the new weapons. Its range can deliver those weapons to launch points within striking distance of any target on Earth. Why build something new when something old works perfectly well? The combination of ancient airframe and futuristic weapon captures everything about the B-52's impossible longevity. The plane itself is almost irrelevant. What matters is getting weapons to where they need to be launched. The B-52 does that job as well as any aircraft ever built. Future upgrades will likely continue this pattern. Whatever new weapons America develops, the B-52 will probably carry them. The airframe has become a permanent feature of American air power, adapting to whatever the future requires. The B-52 should have been replaced decades ago. The economics seem obvious. Maintaining 70-year-old aircraft costs more than operating modern equipment. Fuel consumption is embarrassingly high. Parts obsolescence creates endless headaches. Every upgrade dollar spent on aging airframes could fund next-generation development. Critics have been making this argument since the 1970s. They've been wrong every time. Not because their math was bad, because their alternatives never materialized at acceptable costs. Start with the parts problem. Components manufactured in the 1960s haven't been produced in decades. Companies that built them no longer exist. Factories were demolished. Tooling was scrapped. Technical documentation exists in formats modern computers can't read. Engineers who understood original designs have retired or died. When something breaks, maintenance crews must search decommissioned aircraft for surviving spares, fabricate replacements from scratch, or reverse engineer parts from physical examples. Every solution costs more than mass-produced components would. The expense accumulates across thousands of aircraft systems. Those 8 TF-33 engines represent the worst case. They've been flying since the 1960s. Finding parts requires industrial archaeology. Maintenance costs have skyrocketed. The $11 billion engine replacement program exists partly because continuing with the old engines became economically unsustainable. Fuel consumption piles on additional costs. Elderly engines burn more fuel than modern alternatives. Every B-52 sortie costs more than equivalent missions by efficient aircraft would. Multiply that waste across decades of operations and the numbers become staggering. Environmental concerns add regulatory pressure. The TF-33 engines produce emissions that wouldn't be acceptable in new aircraft. Hydraulic fluids and lubricants include compounds now recognized as harmful. Upgrades address some issues, but the aircraft will never meet modern environmental standards. So why does the B-52 keep flying? Because replacement costs even more. Every proposed successor has failed the economic test. The B-1 was supposed to be cheaper and better. It wasn't. The B-2 was too expensive to buy in useful numbers. Only 21 were built. The B-21 is entering production now, and it still won't replace the B-52. Developing a new bomber to match B-52 capabilities would cost tens of billions. Development timelines stretch across decades. Testing and deployment add more years. By the time any replacement achieved operational status, the B-52 would have provided additional decades of service at upgrade costs far below new development. The bomber continues flying not because it's cheap. It continues because everything else is more expensive. The B-52 Stratofortress will celebrate its 100th birthday in service. Let that sink in. An aircraft designed during the Truman administration will still be flying combat missions when children born today have grandchildren of their own. No one planned for this. The original designers expected the B-52 to serve maybe 20 years before replacement. The Air Force expected successive generations of bombers to make the buff obsolete. Defense planners expected nuclear deterrence to evolve beyond manned aircraft entirely. Instead, the B-52 became something that military aviation has never seen before or since. An aircraft so perfectly suited to its role that nothing else could replace it. A platform so adaptable that it outlived its own obsolescence. A weapon system so cost-effective that newer alternatives couldn't compete. The bomber has dropped more ordnance on America's enemies than any other aircraft in history. It has served in every major conflict since the Korean War. It has evolved from nuclear apocalypse machine to precision strike platform to cruise missile truck to potential hypersonic weapon carrier. Each transformation seemed impossible until it happened. There's a lesson here about military technology that the Pentagon has learned and relearned across 7 decades. The best weapon isn't always the newest or the most advanced. Sometimes it's the one that works, that's available, that can do the job today rather than promising to do it better someday. The B-52 does the job. It has always done the job. It will continue doing the job until someone finally builds something that does it better. So far, no one has.